Well, very good. If I understand correctly, then we have about 25 minutes to still be all together, and then we'll break into a separate session of the member states and Norway who are in the European Blockchain Partnership. But let's use this last amount of time very constructively. I think we've been very inspired by the presentations today on the land registry in Sweden, in the Netherlands with the tax fraud, on the blockchain platform as a service. Hopefully I'm not missing anything. Estonia, of course, with the functionalities. Perhaps really benefiting from the time together, either people, experts from the observatory and forum, or member states experts. Particularly, let's perhaps have a bit of an exchange on how the blockchain platform as a service is relevant, perhaps also some of the Estonian functionalities, and of course this last session on EID, how this could be incorporated into our vision of cross-border public services in the next year. Of course, not curtailing the discussion to that, please feel free to ask each other or to comment on us to any other questions. But perhaps starting it off, does anybody either from the expert side or from the member state side have a question or a comment on blockchain platform as a service, EID functionalities, how these play together? No, I haven't. Okay, perhaps bring. Yes, gladly.
So we're all here gathered talking about blockchain identity, and it's ironic putting those two together in certain ways, because blockchain is a very fast moving environment, and we've all seen in 2.5 years, this entire industry has just absolutely exploded into almost every facet of other industries. And identity on the other side is something that is extremely slow moving and very sensitive and needs a lot of thought before putting into action. So I think when we move forward and we begin to think about these solutions, we have to still remember that identity is something you just don't get wrong. You need to get it right from the first get-go. Otherwise, you don't do it, because the risks of getting it wrong for individuals' privacy, the effects it can have on certain people's lives are humongous. That's kind of, I think it's a very important very important forum we have here, and yeah, I'll just say that.
I mean, I think I kind of agreeing with that very definitely as we move to implementing these public services, even if we start with some exchange of information, let's say between member states, it's simpler at that stage between the 28 and the Commission to identify ourselves. But as soon as we start moving out into linking individual citizens, the EID is essential. I mean, in this kind of public service context, reporting context, compliance context, certification of education, other things that we could go to, this is essential. And I think we also have another set of comments on this side.
Yeah, so I'd like just to emphasize some comments that were made earlier and put things into perspective, and like say, we should chill, right? So no, it's not true that identity, if you get it wrong, the world is going to come to an end, because as Woven stated, that identity is not a single item that contains your entire life. It is a series of statements. So if identity is proving that I'm more than 18 or I'm allowed to drink in a bar, there are millions of students in the US who have fake ID cards. And so replacing that with a slightly better certification is already a pretty good thing. So I think we should be very cautious, but also not over dramatize the situation.
I just wanted to I wanted to share an experience. I'm very excited to hear about blockchain platform as a service, and I'm going to explain why. From the startup ecosystem of the blockchain community, I've been in the space full-time for 4 years, and so I met early on a lot of the startups in the space, and what was really happening was government and private sector would have, 3 months of meetings with them where they'd explain to them what blockchain is, and then they do a pilot. And, these startups, it was before the ICO days, they have their best people and their best staff, training people and then doing a pilot and then finding out that that pilot was just completely irrelevant. So everyone wasted their time and money and expertise. And then everyone talked about, let's do sandboxes. And I haven't really seen tons of that. So I'm very excited about blockchain platform as a service. And I think every entity in the ecosystem, my prediction is, will be excited about that, unless it's an entity that's going to cut them out of their niche. But I guess then they need to play in the game of blockchain as a service. And the last thing I'll say on that is, on the regulatory side, I was with the Chamber of Digital Commerce, and everybody wants to do regulatory sandboxes. Like, how is that possible if each EU member country does their own regulatory sandbox in isolation? So I guess I have a question to some of the players in that space, and maybe others have this question as well. Is it a collaborative, or is it going to be like IBM has a cloud and Amazon has a cloud and Consensus has a cloud, or how's that going to be framed, if anyone knows?
Well, just directly on the sandboxes, I can make one comment, and then, of course, it's open to anybody else. In the FinTech Action Plan, we actually have an action. This is, of course, in the FinTech financial sector area, but it's extending a bit into the data and the overall blockchain, that those countries that have the sandboxes, by our count right now, 13 of the 28 member states are meeting in the European Banking Association especially, and ESAs, the European Supervisory Authorities. It also includes the European Securities Markets Authority and the EIOPA, which is for the pensions, are working together with the member states on coordination, consolidation of, the general criteria that are utilized in a sandbox, and for transparency of publishing the results. And in some of the cases, you have some very interested results published. And then on the basis of this, the Commission is foreseeing publishing guidelines for regulatory sandboxes and perhaps their further development by the end of this year. This again is in the financial sector area, but we have space to go forward then to apply it to, for instance, some of the experimentation with data, maybe non-personal data, also in the context of the free flow of data regulation, which is being adopted. Blockchain, there's an interesting example. I'm not sure if the Lithuanian colleagues are the relevant ones here, but I think there's a sandbox in the Bank of Lithuania that also has a technical testing platform, which was bought by a innovation procurement, a pre-commercial procurement, I know. And then the last words are exactly for this actual European blockchain partnership, whether it's officially classified as that or not. I mean, basically, when we move one of these or several European public services onto the blockchain, we will be, in effect, conducting a regulatory sandbox, because we'll be doing something that is not foreseen in legislation. I don't think anybody bans it, but not foreseen in legislation. So it will be this experimentation with all the member states and with the Commission. So the innovators in this case will be more or less ourselves, our administrations, and us working together. And part of the process will also be seeing if legislation does need to be changed to accommodate this, which in some cases I think not because the technology needs to be regulated, but because a certain way of registering a transaction is already foreseen, and so some flexibility has to be built into that. But I would underline that we would try to do this in a way that would be technology neutral. So the next great thing that comes after blockchain, we're not locked into that for forever and ever. But any other comments on that or anything else?
I did not know a lot of that, so I'm a little embarrassed I didn't know that, but I'm actually glad that it prompted you to share that. So that's really great, because I haven't heard that much about the collaboration on sandboxes. So well done. That's awesome.
Thank you, thank you. But perhaps somebody wants to either, while we're all here together, ask a question from Estonia or Sweden, or how to say, the colleagues working with Smart Dubai. Yes, here on the right-hand side.
This is probably just really a selfish question, but I found it really very hard to actually get information about what people were trying and doing in detail. And I actually think it would help in terms of interoperability if the people could be encouraged to be more open about actually concretely what's going on. Rather, I've seen a lot of press releases saying, oh, we're going to this amazing initiative, we're going to do everything on the blockchain. Great. We are working with this technology. Great. What are you doing? How are you doing it? I learned some things today about projects I thought I knew about. It turned out they were totally different from what I was expecting. And, you know, from the technical point of view, and also for looking at the wider context of what are the consequences of making these moves and trying these things out, and encouraging cross-nationally, cross-border people to work together and actually get things that can, you know, work together. Some methods of encouraging more openness about actually what's going on and sharing things would be good. Just to follow from your comment of just learning about this, basically.
Excellent. Well, I think the Blockchain Observatory and Forum colleagues take this to heart. Of course, at some moment there's a commercial secret or something that is of that sort, and then sometimes you're talking to a barrister or a lawyer like me, and then I can't even go into how to say perhaps the greater technical detail. So with some of them, and some things haven't been decided yet. But I mean, I think this could be perhaps a call for some more, how to say, technical information to be collected, especially on the best practice. And I think this can be helpful to all of us, even those of us who our technical skills are more limited. Any other questions or comments? Yes, Nadia.
It's more working. I thank you, Peteris, for what you said. I think it will be very important to find a use case where there is transversality and no problem of onboarding the population. And perhaps if we find a use case around perhaps SMEs or registration for companies or commercial things, it will be interesting to have a real experimentation between all the countries or the participants, because I think we talk about education, but I think in the room we are not in the same level of experimentation on the technology, and it's very important to put I don't know in English what we say, how we said, but in France we said mettre les mains dans le cambouis. So put the hand in the
Hands on.
Ouais, voilà. Thank you. And I think it's very important, but because we can talk and present the things, but it's important. And the other thing, it's how to find a way to collaborate with a large panel of actors. We just began last week in the south of France a project with the interministerial delegation of transportation between the port of Marseille and Lyon and what we said the Axe Rhône-Saône in France. It's on supply chain and how to know if a chemical product of alimentary product it's going on the good way on multi-modality transportation. And around the table there is the transporters. They don't have money to that. Okay, it's clear. There is some big producer of alimentation. There is the regional companies. There is the government. There is everybody, and we find a model to have some investor on that, and the other participate on the consortium, even they don't finance. And the discussion on one day was very important. We are beginning just now. And I think it could be interesting to find in the same way a project in Europe, in a small, perhaps in a small part, but it could be interesting. We can do the port to Marseille, to Amsterdam, perhaps with Leila, but there is I think it's very important to find out and to go ahead on that.
Definitely. I mean, and this is only a welcome comment, I think. Actually, I said at the beginning, and this is not any criticism. We talked. You had difficulties getting here, but the blockchain partnership, who we'll be meeting with in a few moments, and actually for anybody else who wasn't here at that time, we aim to have use cases defined by September. Functional specifications by December, and to actually start doing things with the Connecting Europe facility funding already next year, and then moving into the digital program. Obviously, we'll have to start with a few selected things, and then we can put other things a little bit more on the medium term. And I think it's not at all the first time that we hear about the ports and the shipping, which might be a little bit more on the complicated side. But I mean, this is up to the partnership. I don't speak for them. We're going to have the meeting on that. But I mean, I think there's definitely a good set of use cases, and I think there'll be enough to do. Also, very critically looking at where blockchain is useful and where it might be fine just to keep the existing infrastructure. We really should use it where there's a good reason to. Yes, there's a.
Arne Lors again from IBM and Hyperledger. I just wanted to follow up on this idea of a blockchain platform as a service. And I mean, my concern is, although I understand this might be interesting, if we're not more specific about what that platform is supposed to do, there is a risk that, you know, it becomes this thing that's supposed to be used for everything and anything, when I don't necessarily think this is the right approach overall. And I want to point out that, you know, I'm actually an open source and open standards specialist, and I've been doing blockchain for 2.5 years. And all along, I've been asked by different parties in my industry and around, when are we going to do standards for blockchain? And my answer keeps being, well, I think it's too early. And it's not because I don't believe in standards. I spent most of my career working in standards. I do think we will need standards. And at the application layer, so like in the case of self-sovereign identity, there are efforts that have been referred to, like DIF, DID, and other specifications, some of which are W3C, etc. I think it makes sense because we better understand the use cases and the framework. But at the blockchain framework level, for instance, it's very early on. And Hyperledger, I mean, few people know that, but most people refer to Hyperledger as if it's one software or one network. It's not. It's neither. Hyperledger is an organization. There are actually 5 different blockchain frameworks with very different characteristics that are being developed within Hyperledger. The most popular is Hyperledger Fabric, but there is Hyperledger Indy, which is the framework under which the sovereign foundation network runs. But there are others. And so my point is, you know, within Hyperledger, we actually have an activity about trying to define an architecture that's kind of general to all blockchain frameworks. That's the generalization of all the different frameworks we have within the organization. And that alone is a challenge. So we are very far from being able to say, oh, and this is how we're going to integrate the different components from one framework to another. So although I totally understand the enthusiasm and the will to have standards, I think we have to be realistic. This technology is still very young. And so we don't want to close the door and corner ourselves in one specific technology choice because, you know, it might be painful to upgrade later on. And so when we're talking about a platform, I'm a bit concerned about a specific, you know, that this would force us to make specific choices.
Certainly, I think we wouldn't have one platform, and I just will make the comment, which might be supplemented by Benoit Abelus from my team who's here, that actually whether we like it or not, ISO has a technical committee 307 already working on blockchain standards for delivery, I believe, by 2020, and CEN is working on a white paper. and I think hopes to have some achievements by July. So this work is going on. It's how to say, not being controlled by us, but it's there. And I think we have another hand, and if Benoit is somewhere in the room, he might want to make a comment also on standards. And we have two hands in this corner here.
Michel Evital from Copenhagen Business School. So, we heard a lot of talks about blockchain today, and you can see there are two ways to handle it. One, to keep it very transparent, so users don't know anything, we just change the engine. It's all become very transparent to them. But actually, we're going to miss much of the opportunity to create impact on change and radical changes, which will have major impact. But if we all know what's around, we're all aficionados of blockchain, but if you go outside, people are totally clueless, regardless of level. And if we know something about change, definitely in the public sector, unless people know what they are, you'll get major resistance to change, even if it's a great stuff. So the only way to actually start change, any use case you start on a public level, would require some kind of, I would say, recruitment of change agents from all kind of parts of society. And the only way to do it is actually to come with a major, I would say, educational initiative to show people what it is, what the potential, and how to deal with this. Otherwise, any use case is destined to die very early just because of all kind of resistance to change. And this is just 101. So when we deal with any technology, you need to think about all the social impacts, social factors, and recruit whatever social agents you can to join, from activists to general public.
Thank you. And we have three more hands in this row, so please take the floor as you wish.
Thank you. This was just a brief response to the gentleman from IBM and from Hyperledger. The goal here, especially with the blockchain platform as a service, is really, at least within some of the discussions, I'm sure that there are many different visions for the solutions all around the world. It's not to set any form of standard that would create any form of limitation for the way we look at the technology and will form roadmaps for its development in the future. If anything, it would be intended to essentially help accelerate that part, where every area where we actually see potentially that absence of maturity should be supplemented with a tool that would help us to test things out potentially faster and cheaper. It does not lock any form of entity, or should not aim at locking any form of entity with any vendor, any technology, or any very specific best practice that would have been defined way too early, which is an aspect that I very much agree with you on, in the sense that it's way too early to try to lock people into a very specific way of thinking or a specific practice. And if anything, we should try to make sure that solutions like these are specifically built to avoid that, and if anything, to allow us to test things under multiple different angles, different structures, but more importantly, to just lower the cost of that, lower the difficulty, and potentially facilitate its access to a greater number of people to essentially help contribute to this kind of testing phase. That was it on my end.
Hello again. I just wanted to add, really, that despite the focus topic of government service and digital identity, perhaps it wouldn't be the worst idea to further include a number of different players, say new incumbents within the blockchain business. I feel like, for example, we often overlook throughout the day stuff like cryptocurrency exchanges, whilst again it was not a focus. You got all these new players acting in a new way, and often we are ignoring that they're also starting to prevent new waves of innovation and starting to solidify themselves as dominant players in the market. So just to add that, we should keep in mind that, that we need to continue maintaining innovation open to everyone in all sorts of development. That's really it. Thank you.
Great, and then we had another hand on this.
Maybe just real quick, Tom from the Observatory. I was really glad to hear your talk about the change agents and stuff, because one of the things I couldn't help thinking about today, one of the parts of the discussion that I maybe missed a bit, was the whole question of the end user experience, right? So especially when you're talking about self-sovereign identity, I mean, now I have, if I have control over my personal identity, I also have responsibility for it. And in my particular case, perhaps paradoxically considering my line of work, I can get easily confused by technology, right? So here I am running around having to collect all these attestations, having to understand what I can do with them, having to understand, the flow of information and my responsibility in that. And, for the average person, that may start to get too much. So what happens when you have something that you can use that becomes too complex or you need help, you turn to a third party to help you out with that, right? So you're back where you started. So maybe, I don't know, it's an observation and maybe a question. And again, maybe it's a bit too soon for this discussion, but who's thinking about, how average people are going to be able to understand these things and use them?
Okay, did we still have another hand on the side? Yes. Oh, okay, sorry.
Just one. So, to react on the need for technical education, I've been talking about blockchain for over 3 years now. The only thing I explain is hashing, because in the end nobody cares, and it's all about the customer experience, about the solution that you built on top of this entire stack, of which the blockchain is but a small part. And the biggest hurdle I've seen in the past 3.5, 4 years is actually the way we work, the things we do already, both on an organizational and on a technical level. If there is something already in place, why try harder? It already works. I work for a bank, just for your information. And on an organizational level, it is, why should we collaborate? We can do it on our own too and make a decent profit out of it. And those are the things I see. There is already something technical in place, so we don't need a replacement, and we can do it on our own. We don't need collaboration. While in blockchain, it is something new technical on which you have to collaborate. And that's the biggest thing to tackle.
Do we have any final comments or questions as we come to the end of the comments? Sorry, didn't look to my right.
That puts a lot of pressure on me. Now, I think I just want to point out, I think the educational part, I'm part of this blockchain space since 5 years, full-time since 2.5 years. And what I noticed is that people who join, they think they understand the technology and they come up with all kind of cool ideas. Then they try and then, oh, actually, that's not how it works. And you notice in conversations with people who just started how they think about this. Why I'm saying this, I think what came up is like this platform as a service. It doesn't really matter too much which blockchain. I think obviously some people have preferences. I think it's important to learn, at least for this audience and the technologies, how to think about this, because otherwise we come up with a use case which is a database. That's not how it, that doesn't make sense. But if people are not educated, you don't find the use cases, the good ones. And I think that's why I think it's really something where it just doesn't matter what you do, you learn something, and then you kind of understand, oh yeah, we did something, it was useless, but now I get it. And I think the next time you avoid this. And I think that's this shift in the paradigm. That's the thing on like the experimentation part. And on the user, like my mom, I'm a technologist, so I told her about the internet for like years and didn't really care. And the thing which works now is like WhatsApp. Like these are the things like once you remove this, and she doesn't care whether it's encrypted or not, we care. But I think it is something we need to make it really user friendly. And that's why I'm more on the camp of like the technology needs to be abstracted. Yes, people need to tell her it's okay, yeah, it's secure, whatever we do in the future, but it's not that she needs to understand. And I think many people will not understand and explain TCP/IP and all the other technologies we're using every day. If we can't achieve this, I think we fail. That's my point.
I think this is a good note to end on. So I say thank you to all the experts from the Blockchain Observatory and Forum, member states and Norway from the Blockchain Partnership. Please don't leave. So now we have 10 minutes for a little bit of a shift. And again, thank you very much for your participation. And we look forward to seeing you all again from the Observatory and Forum, I think in the autumn. But please stay active, in the community and in other places. And I think we're finalizing a couple of the reports. So thank you again, and thank you to Ken and team for everybody.